Okay, welcome to 4.6. We're going to be looking at how plants grow. 2 lessons ago, I mentioned the word meristem and meristematic cells. Those are cells that allow for plants to grow. That is what we're going to be looking at today. First of all, cell division does not actually take place all throughout a plant. There are very specific regions in a plant where the plant is able to grow. And that's not the same for animals, right? So we're able to grow all parts of our body, but cell division in plants only takes place in a certain area, or certain areas, that is. However, plants keep growing for as long as they live. That's why you've seen trees that are so tall and so wide, because they've been alive for a really long time. For as long as they are alive, they're growing. So how is this possible? How is it possible that not every part of the plant is able to divide, but yet they're growing for the entirety of their lives? It's because of those cells that I mentioned earlier, which are our meristematic cells. Finding some room. If you recall from 2 lessons ago, meristematic cells are undifferentiated cells. So they do not have a role as of yet. So they just divide. And then as they divide, they specialize into specific types of cells. There are 2 types of meristems or meristematic cells. One is apical meristems. And the second is lateral meristems. Again, the process is exactly the same. These are undifferentiated cells that, as they divide, take on a specific role. So apical meristems allow for the plant to grow up and down. So you have the shoot system growing above the ground, and you've got the root system growing below the ground, and they're growing upwards and downwards at the same time. That is possible through the apical meristem. Now, alternatively, with the lateral meristem, it allows for the plant or the tree to grow wider, right? So it allows for that diameter of the trunk or that stem to grow really wide. Now, within apical meristems, you've got the root growing and you've got the shoot growing. They grow in slightly different ways. So when it comes to the root and how it grows and what the apical meristem looks like, it has to do with elongation. So at the very, very tip of the root cell, you can separate that section into 3 different bits. So the very, very bottom of the root can be separated into 3 sections. The very bottom is the region of cell division. So these are so this is the very tip of the root where cells are dividing. And then as they divide, or after they divide, they go into the region of elongation. So this is when the cell itself actually becomes long or grows to be really long, which is what allows for the root to then grow. And after that, it goes to the region of maturation, and this is where it specializes into a certain type of cell. Right? So the meristem in the root goes through these 3 regions before it becomes specialized. Now, that's not the same with the shoot system, and we're not going to look into it too much, but generally there are a few differences. So there's no elongation and no region of maturation specifically for a shoot system. But if you've looked at a plant or a growing plant, in certain corners where the stem and part of a leaf meet, there might be a little bud, and that's crucial for the shoot system or the apical meristem in the shoot system rather. So this little structure that I've drawn in the very center, that is the budding. That's the bud that you might see as you are looking at a growing plant. And in those corners, you will have the immature leaves. So those are cells that are eventually going to become leaves, but they haven't gotten there yet. The bottom, that little bit dip there, that is the apical meristem. That's where a lot of those cells are dividing. And those corners, that is where those cells or the future buds might be after that stem has grown. So the meristem is forming into a new bud. So what I've shown you here is first I showed you how the apical meristem looks like in a root system, and then I showed you what the apical meristem might look like in a shoot system. So they're both still apical meristems, they are just a little bit different in the two systems. Now, when you look at lateral meristems, they're more common in in trees, especially those trees with barks around them. And I'm sure you are all familiar with the fact that the older a tree is, the wider it will be, and you can actually count the rings within a tree stub to be able to see how old that tree is. And we'll be able to explain exactly why. So on the very, very outside, we have our bark, and those cells are no longer living. So the bark is not actually a living part of that tree. Those are the rings that you see when you're looking at any tree stem. Now this black structure that I'm drawing here, that is a full layer of that tree, and that is the phloem. So if you remember from our vascular tissue, that is the structure that allows for sugars and nutrients and hormones to be passed throughout the plant or the tree. So the phloem is living cells, and on the very outside, you've got cork that's not living anymore. And each part or each layer of that ring are xylem. So those are the transportation tissue that take water from the roots into the plant. Those are xylems from the previous year. So what happens is in the very, very center, you have cells that are the xylem that is growing for this year. And then as the xylem die or they are no longer living, they are pushed to the very, very outside. And every year there's a new ring formed because there's more and more xylem that's pushed to the outside. Oops. So that's the general structure for apical and lateral meristems. I'm not going to need you to know everything about this, just the things that I've mentioned, and you should be able to explain each of these. For homework, I'm going to ask you to do page 147, questions number 2 and 3, I think. Maybe? No, 2 and 3. And 4. Okay, so that is your homework. That is 4.6.